so many questions and audience on how to. I always tell people it is less time. Audience को मत ही करो. इसमें time मत डालो. Questions पूछ लो. Discussion कर लेते हैं. Uh, Hello, back. Welcome back to everyone who has joined us now and who has been listening to all the panels since morning. Um, I hope the quiz was fun and it has stimulated your inquisitivity to to come down to this panel where we are going to reimagine the very constitution of the space of policy making. Uh, the gross underrepresentation of women across state institutions raises serious questions about the composition of these establishments of governance and their capability to deliver quality governance. Uh, in the light of these factors, the panel today will cover the issues of underrepresentation of women in policy decision-making space and the difficulties faced by them in navigating these spaces too. Further, the panel would elucidate on how women's participation can impact policy decision making and explicate the need for the capacity building of women leadership for future and to different institutions of governance. For this panel, I would like to now invite our esteemed panel to the dais, starting with the first panelist, Ms. Jyoti Mani. Ms. Wherever, ma'am. Ms. Jyotimani is the Member of Parliament Lok Sabha from Karur constituency, Tamil Nadu. And she's known for, she's an empathetic voice in the parliament about raising issues concerning oppressed and the marginalized. She's a member for various important parliamentary committees like the Standing Committee on Industry, Parliamentary Committee on Welfare of Other Backward Classes, and Advisor Committee for Women and Child Development. She's also a political activist and author, with her prominent works including the No Shortcut to Leadership book, that is an autobiographical work of her struggle to provide drinking water to a Dalit colony in her village as an elected representative. The next panelist for the event is Ms. Pallavi Parikh. Yeah, please come to the stage. Yeah. Ms. Parikh is an advisor to Netri, that's an incubator and aggregator for women in political ecosystem, equipping them to choose viable career options in politics. Pallavi's role is invested in building an inclusive industry of policymakers in the country. She comes with 13 years of experience in corporate and non-corporate sector towards inducing and building foundational elements of inclusion for gender diversity. In her extensive career journey, Pallavi has worked on implementation of existing state policies on gender justice and inclusion, and their inclusion specifically at the ground level. Pallavi is also the founder of an organization called Ungender, and it's an enterprise which is SaaS technology based, and it serves solution to bringing data and technology driven approach to equity and inclusion at the workplaces. As an author, she has contributed to the narrative of 70 years of legal development of feminism in India. And she has been awarded with various awards as Women of Excellence, Social Innovator, and Women of Impact Award in 2018, 2019, and 2020 respectively. Our third panelist for this discussion is a name you must all be aware by now. You have heard her in the technology policy panel in the morning. Ms. Aparajita Bharti. But those of you who have just joined us, I would like to introduce you to her. She's the founding partner for Quantum Hub, that's a leading public policy research and consulting firm, and a co-founder of VILAC, which is Young Leaders for Active Citizenship, which works with young people to increase their participation in political processes. She started her career in public policy as a legislative assistant to Member of Parliament, and she holds a Master of Public Policy degree from Oxford University. She's also World Economic Forum Global Shaper Alumna from New Delhi Hub. And Aprajita's work in policy centers mostly around gender, tech policy, as you have heard in the morning, and structure of Indian democratic institutions. I would also like to introduce you to our moderator for the event, Dr. Nilanjana Sengupta. She is a faculty at School of Development at Azim Premji University, and has decades-long work on gender, labor, their participation in labor forces, etc. We had a fourth panelist on the panel, that is Dr. Kalpana Gopalan, who will join us shortly. I'll introduce her so that when she joins, she's just participating in the discussion. Dr. Kalpana is a compositive public policy professional. Her 34 years of work experience in the Indian administrative services spans land administration, rural development, education, public distribution system, and several other important sectors. She's currently the additional chief secretary for labor and public grievances redressal at Government of Karnataka. Dr. Kalpana is recipient of several esteemed awards for her much acknowledged work. Awards including Mother Teresa Women Empowerment Award, then for our outstanding contribution to excellence in women leadership specifically. She has been recognized as the great warrior of humanity by International Human Rights Advisory Council for her active and very active work during COVID-19. And she has a doctorate in public policy from IIM Bangalore. So we're looking forward to have her in next 10 minutes. But I'll now hand over the stage to the Miss Professor Nilanjana and the panelists. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here with all of you. But first of all, I must congratulate the Policy Forum for organizing a panel discussion on such an important theme. So thank you very much for having all of us here, and I look forward to a fantastic discussion. But just before we jump into the questions, I'd just like to frame some of the key pegs around which we'll now today have the discussion. So I think an important question which is reflected in the title itself is underrepresentation. And is there underrepresentation, and why is there underrepresentation? Why are there so few women in policy? And by policy, I'm talking about policy making, about policy influencing, about policy implementation. Could be any of these spaces, could be legislature, could be executive, could be the researchers and advocates who are out there. So why are there so few women? That's one question. So what are some of the barriers to accessing these spaces for women? The second, I think, a very critical question is that once women enter these spaces, even there, it is very difficult for them to make themselves heard and visible. So what are some of the hurdles that women face in actually creating a significant, a space for themselves within these circles? So I think that's another very important question that we'll try and explore today. And the third very important point that we'll want to understand is how, if we want to change how things are, how can we create a better ecosystem and create capacities for women to take up such leadership roles within policy spaces. But I'd like to also pause here for a moment and just reflect upon two important things. One is, who are the women here that we are talking about? Who are these women? And we all know that women are a heterogeneous category. It's not an undifferentiated category. And women's identities are intersected by caste, class, and different other axes of marginalities. So for those, and even today when we talk about women, I think it's important to also move beyond the binary framing of gender and talk about multiple gender expressions. So if we look at those women who are coming from these positions of marginality and embodying all these different axes of marginality, I think the struggle for them is even more difficult. So when we discuss today, perhaps we'll also reflect on which kind of women, if at all, are being able to inhabit and make a dent in these spaces. The other thing I think, again, very critical is, while it is the very first step is to have more women in policy spaces, what we are perhaps looking for is actually gender integration within policy, right? So how do we make policy more gender sensitive, or how do we build a gender lens? And what do we really mean by building a gender lens? We are probably talking about, in a very simplistic way, we are talking about the fact that policy should be equally beneficial for all genders. We could also be talking about the fact that certain policies also taking up certain issues or themes which have so far been considered not that important, but which are very, very critical to the well-being of women. And this could be access to potable water, could be access to fuel, could be childcare, affordable childcare, could be access to technology and finance, could be a whole list of things, and the list can go on. And I think it's also important to recognize that India actually has taken certain major strides in ensuring representation of women, at least in institutions of local governance. But that experience has at the same time taught us that representation does not automatically lead to actual leadership or to the development of a gender lens in policy. It does not always enable that automatic shift that we bring women and they immediately start working as leaders. We all know that. So then what are these challenges and how do we overcome these challenges? And I'm sure there are certain enablers, as many of these fantastic women will tell us, because through their own journeys, where they have been able to overcome many, many challenges to actually make a very significant contribution to their location of work and space of work. So over to all of you, and I'll pose this first question, and I'll request you to reflect maybe for 5 to 7 minutes from your experience so that we can also learn. So the first question, of course, is the one that we began with, which is, why is there this lack of women's representation in policy spaces? And once women enter these spaces, what are some of the challenges they face, and what are some of the enablers which actually help at least some women make their presence felt and make their voices heard? So I'll start with you, Jyotimani ji.
Thank you. I heard that this is the first time you guys are taking up this initiative. Congratulations. Before I get into my experience, I just would like to ask my young friends what they think really a hurdle for a woman. Any of you? Yeah, correct. Then? Important. Correct. Any men? Only women should have view on women issues. Moral support, that's best thing you guys can provide. Thank you. So, whatever actually our young friends are making is a solution. This is what hurdle people like me, everybody actually, people like her in the bureaucracy facing for the last many decades. Basically, policy making places, whether it is a politics or it's a governance, is strongly believed that it's a male domain. Not many men feel as our young friend feel we do. But there is a role to be a moral support. Generally, they think actually politics is a male domain. It's a woman's responsibility to do the moral support. Not only moral support is a very, really nice, kind, cute word. We expected to do all kind of donkey jobs, probably. So that's where actually the mindset is set. So when I'm sitting here because there is a 33% reservation in Panchayat Raj system. I used to tell in my party that I'm not your product, I am Rajiv Gandhi's product. Without 33% reservation, people like me from a humble agriculture background in a very remote village might not even think about contesting an elections. Then it was like 25 years before 1996 when that is the first time Panchayat Raj election is announced after the 33% reservation in Panchayat, 73rd, 74th amendment. Despite having a reservation, when I said I will fight election, everybody said, how can a woman fight an election? I said, it's a reserve seat. Then people said, Kaligalam has come. Only the seat woman can fight. How can it happen? This kind of actually elections are only men. There are seat only reserved for women is something not good. So despite having a reservation, this was the mentality set even now. But things have slowly changed. I don't want to be very skeptical because I have seen in my life that things are gradually changing. So that is the first thing actually we all firmly believe, including women, our family, our society, our institution. Everything believe politics or policy making is a male domain. Only intellectual jobs can be done only by men. So this is the mindset actually prevailing across the globe. It's not only in India. We are very bad, of course. So second thing is, as somebody rightly said, actually our voice here. Just because of you are speaking, it's not necessary everybody hears you. You have to make repeated attempt that your voice here. We have to tell in the place where you are working, whether it is a college or in a political party or a government. You have to tell my voice matter. You have to tell 10 times, 20 times, 50 times, but despite that there is a chance you might not be heard. But you have to keep breaking that. First you have to hear me, then you have to hear other person. So this happened over years. Many of us in my state feel just because of Dr. Muthulakshmi Reddy made her voice heard to become a first woman student in the medical college. We all can imagine we can study. Of course, Periyar had a very big role, and Kamarajar with the primary education, that he also played a way. There is a lot of, apart from movements, there is an affirmative actions in terms of education, in terms of access to the education. So that actually also social movement helped Tamil Nadu to reach many women to make their dreams really happen. Third thing is actually access. Just because there is a system to reservation, just because there is seats, 33% of seats reserved for women, it doesn't mean that actually we will have a red carpet. Even though actually we also, like everybody else, like even it's a reserved seat, two women contesting against each other. I have some different opinion on this 33% seats where women contest against each other. I'll tell you later. Even then the elections are predominantly fight between political parties, fight between men and their egos and their ideologies and their class, caste, gender, everything. So in that space, despite winning an election, it's not necessary you will have a free hand to exercise your power. Despite having millions of women got elected, still actually when 33% reservation for women in assemblies and parliament, when we discussed, many people standing up and saying that actually all women in Panchayat Raj are praxis. Then some husband, brother, father, they are only ruling the institutions. I used to ask them back. Of course, you are right, we are not saying all the millions of women are completely exercising their power. In last 70 years, there are many men, and many men sitting in the parliament and the state assemblies. Almost they are 95%. Have you heard all of them speaking on the issue? Have you heard all of them working very hard? Have you ever, you can vouch that all of them exercise their power? Then those times we never stand up and say all men are bad, all men are not exercise their power. But when it comes to women, we've been in 2000 year for kitchen. But despite that, we are coming and started working. Then we expect miracle that all 1 million women, 2 million women has to exercise the power overnight. But having that challenges, I have in the Panchayat Raj institution for 10 years. I have seen many women who are coming from a very, very complicated background than me, have successfully discharged their duties. They have set a role model for their model Panchayat, model villages. But this is how actually we have to fight this and move on. Just before I forgot her name, when she introduced me, she said, what are all the committees I'm into? I am into industry committee, OBC committee, yes. Industry committee I fought and got. Because I said I will go to industry committee because I said there are many men ask for it. I said I represent the 4th largest export. I think I deserve to be in the industry committee. I fought and get the industry committee. OBC, my party appointed me. But the women and child, I never asked. That's a consultative committee. I was not there when that committee list was asked. When suddenly I found my name is in the Women and Child Development Committee, I went and asked my floor leader, I didn't ask for women and child development committee, then how can you put into that? It's great that he said, you are a woman, actually, that's why I put it you there. He said, okay, I'm sorry. Next time when the committee change happen, I will put you where you want. So there is a traditional mindset that women are for only for teacher, doctor, so those kind of nurses, for those kind of service profession. Secondly, throughout the world, we are having what kind of portfolios we having. I have, my officer send me the list. So I have seen family, children, youth, elderly, disabled affairs, followed by social affairs, environment, natural resources, energy, employment, labor, occasional training, and women affairs, gender equality. We can never see that defense, home, these are all the default portfolios for women. So even you just started your politics, you just fight election as men do. Election is not easy. For election, when we go to election, it's not men and women. It's an election. We used to see that actually men candidate work for 10 hours, 12 hours during election. We work 20 hours. We hardly sleep 2 hours because we think that when women lose an election, everybody will say women are not capable of winning elections. Even before you getting tickets, when not only my political party, every political party, when screening committee sit together to select candidate, first thing when woman name comes at, that itself a very rare woman name coming into discussion in the committees itself. The first thing we have, actually, woman cannot win an election. So okay, tell the reason. Women do not have access to finance. It's true. We are not denying that. Then second thing is, actually, woman is not capable of doing jobs. Politics is a really tough job. Politics, you need to have a lot of, you have to face lot of hurdles. Then you have to fight with the bureaucracy, but hope she's not taking it offense. So these, then dealing, you do not have an experience to deal the bureaucracy. So these are all the list comes out. But when men candidate, there are 3 men in the list of candidature, then you don't see any winnability or any, you don't see any, the men also might not have financial access, not necessarily all the men from all the community background have, but those kind of things. I used to fight. I was given an opportunity in the screening committee once. First, when we were in Mahila Congress, we asked Rahulji, we should get ticket. Then he used to say, don't ask ticket, think big. You have to see how to get into the place where tickets are decided. We used to tell him that, no, this is not possible. We didn't get ticket at all. We didn't get the name listed in the committee at all. How come we get into the place where tickets are decided? Finally, we have given opportunity in Telangana, 2 women, me and Sarmista Mugaji, and another one chairman. It's a kind of 100% woman member group. We have given an opportunity to decide the tickets. When we went and searched for a woman candidate, we were shocked. We thought at least we will find out 50 candidates, where at least we can give some 15-20 candidate seats. With all our effort, we tried our best. We went to all Panchayat Raj institutions who are all elected in the Congress ticket. We find out who are all the office bearers in the main Congress party and the Mahila Congress or student union, or student Congress or youth Congress. But trust me, we are able to get only 15 candidates. Because why I'm saying this, I'm just finish in 2 minutes because other panelist has to speak. This work has to be started from the political parties. Unless until political parties entertain women in their party structure, whether it is a booth or a block or a district or a state or national, and systematically groom the woman leadership, it's very difficult for women to compete in the elections. It's not only 33%. I said why I oppose the 33% in the present current form. First, I disagree with the idea of 33% because we are 50% women. Why the hell we have to get the 33% reservation? Second things, why don't political parties bring that 33% or 50% reservation within their political structure? If they bring 33% reservation in their own political party structure, then there is an opportunity for more women can fight election. Importantly, not necessary for woman and woman can fight election and one woman defeat another woman. So there we have to think differently. We have to catch hold of political parties, political system. We have to make them accountable, make them transparent, make them determined to fight for our causes. So actually, we are actually striking somewhere which we cannot get the result. So this is my experience. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was fantastic. And what you ended with was also a very, very insightful moment. But I'll move with the same question to Pallavi. So, in your opinion, from the space where you come from, what do you think are the factors that sort of determine, the low presence of women? And what are some of the challenges women have in accessing such spaces?
Yes. So I have to struggle very hard to find the missing blocks which are left untouched. But since we talked about patriarchy, I don't want to discuss about the whole concept of patriarchy, but let's look at two more offsprings of patriarchy here, which is internalized sexism and benevolent sexism. Okay, it's am I audible? Is this better? Too loud. Okay. Yes. So the reason why it's important for us to acknowledge and understand that is because in the list of structural barriers, when we start answering the question that ma'am just posed, if we do not identify all the clusters and all the elements in this pipeline of what is preventing women from taking that step outside, for policy making or women in decision making, any time or any place outside their house, their home, is where it all begins. What's stopping them from stepping out of that house? Because I don't think staying at home you can actually be in the power. It's said work from home and all that nonsense is going around. It doesn't take you much far. It will not. So eventually you will have to step out and you must step out. Now what's stopping that are these two elements that I spoke about. One is, of course, what is being told, what is being governed, what is being restricted by the person from the opposite gender. And that's why whenever we start thinking about patriarchy, we are instantly looking at men. Because that's how we have been conditioned also, that if something is problematic and we are talking about patriarchy, but patriarchy also does not mean that alone. And that's why I want you to get introduced to the both sides. The second part is internalized sexism, which is what women also have logged, created subconsciously, consciously. There's this image that we see ourselves as, and that is with ages, and it's almost like a DNA conditioning that has been set, that women want to see themselves in a certain, women see themselves in the way that the world has taught them to see themselves as. So when they look in the mirror, they are not really looking at their real image. They are looking at whether they are fitting into the image that the world is expecting out of them. And most of the decisions, even if the door is open and a woman is not stepping out, is because of this internalized limitation that has been created. So we'll have to work with both. Right? We'll have to work with men, we'll have to work with women also. And that work is happening on the ground. So I'll completely agree with you on this one, that there's a lot of work happening on both sides of the ground. Now, the minute we acknowledge that while it will take some time to actually coach the men to be the amazing support, it will also take the same amount of time for women to be able to start recognizing that, sorry, just got distracted. So happy to see there's a nail paint on this. The reason I'm mentioning this is because for certain sectors, it is also expected that women should start looking differently. I remember there was a policy forum where I had went, and the lady, very elderly person, I will not want to take their name, they just looked at me and they said, Bindi, long hair, nail paint, what kind of feminist are you? And it really hurt me. I was a young person that time. It really hurt me, and I actually questioned myself on the work that I'm doing and whether working for women issues or actually feeling for the cause, am I not supposed to look after myself? Is it wrong that my nail paint is perfect? The reason I was so happy to see this nail paint, intentional and intentional doesn't matter, but I was happy, is because there's also that physical, that visual image that needs to be broken. Whenever women are thinking about stepping into spaces which are full of men, there's a complete identity crisis or makeover that is expected out of them. And that will require to be done. Walk into spaces where you will see less women. And I'm categorically choosing to say less women and not saying more women, because I want you to focus on the number of women right now and not the number of men who are there. Wherever you will see that there are less women, the way the existing one are dressed,
the way they are talking, the way they are whispering to each other, the way they walk, everything changes. And as they have to continue being in that same space, visually also their appearance starts changing, it starts evolving. I've spent times with women who have actually reached their decision making. Their voice has changed. They speak very loud. The soft spoken voice has gone. The way they walk is different. The way they sit is different. It's and I sit with them because the work that we do on ground, and then we want to keep talking to women and understand why they're not stepping out, what is stopping them. And this is what scares them, that we will have to change our fundamental nature. Which takes me back to the first part, that what our fundamental nature is supposed to be something which is being conditioned into us for generations, that you're supposed to speak softly, or you're supposed to dress in a certain manner, or not do this or not do that. Imagine the kind of mental conflict for any woman to actually take this decision and think about actually venturing into this in a serious manner, right? And I'm expecting everybody who is sitting here, irrespective of their gender, is actually invested in this question, both in the question and also finding a way to address this. Then comes the third part. Who is making the decision for women? It's not them. The question of agency, the question of who makes decision for the smallest things in a woman's life in our society. And yes, there are exemptions. Yes, things are changing. That's very beautiful. I'm a product of that change. My mother, some 25 years ago, in a small village in Raila, was told to contest for the Sarpanch elections, right? And I was young, my sister was young, and my dad and I think her decided that let go of it. It's almost like it was a present that was coming their way and they chose to let go. I mean, now I look back and I'm like, how can you let go of an amazing opportunity like this? But I don't even know who took the decision, and my dad always hates whenever I mention this story. But it wasn't her who took this decision, and even if she took it, why isn't she happy with that decision? So somewhere there's always a conflict with respect to who actually, not just what's on the face of it, who actually is taking the decision for a woman. And here we are talking about a decision of stepping out and being there, because getting in a position, forget me, getting in a position where I see everybody sitting here, it doesn't happen in 1 month, 1 year, 5 years. You have to be at it. And it is also not something which is a side job, which brings me to the fourth point, which is how much time do we actually have in our hands? All of us 24 hours, same 24 hours, care work, housework, memory work, because even if you're not doing anything, you're still reminding everybody in your life what they are supposed to be doing. There's so much work and the same amount of time that's going in it. Sitting at home in this super connected world, you still can't manage it. You still have to be there on ground, because decision making is not happening. Yeah, we think that decision making is happening in some fancy offices and other places. No, you have to get there. Fancy offices and all these beautiful things that we see at the end, that, wow, look at this woman, look at this person, you know, life is so set. You have to reach there. In order to reach there, you have to like pave the way. You have to dirty your hands. You have to roll up your sleeves and say that I'm going to be there to make this happen. Nobody else is doing it for you, and whoever is doing it will get there. So from a third point to the fourth point, with same number of hours in our hand, for how many women it is actually possible to say it out loud, even think in their own mind that this is going to be my priority. You know, something else other than my family, something else other than my kids, which it doesn't have to be. Always keep connecting with the first point here. A lot of human psychology at play here. How many of them will actually be able to say that, yes, I was told that this is supposed to be my priority, but I acknowledge that this was wrong conditioning and it is not even applicable on me. So I will step out. I'll manage both, or I will not manage the other one. I'll just focus on this part. How many are actually independent in their thinking? Not empowered, but independent in their thinking and sorted in their thinking with the right kind of mentorship. And that's where the role of mentorship becomes very crucial. Every day, That's what at Netri we are trying to plug in. But how many of those women will actually have the right mentor at the right time to be able to sit and consult on these aspects and say that this is how you go about it? You don't have to balance, you don't have to manage, this is how you do it. And when they do, then we start answering the question, what all is there for them to do? I don't think a lot of women, even if they're thinking about sitting at home, they understand what it means to be a woman in policy making. What are the roles? Policy making, is it just politics? Is politics just about running for elections? Is it just about being on ground? And what we see, because our school of education is also movies. Majority of the people in our country don't even know the reality of most of the concepts that we are talking about. We don't know what actually politics or politics as an industry is. We don't know what actually goes on in the ground. And because of that ignorance, because of this invisibility, even if you want to do it and you have sorted out the first 4 levels, the 5th level, you're again clueless. So many levels, so many of them. But I do want to acknowledge that privilege does play a lot of role. And one of the reasons I'm here is because even if the family didn't want it, I was in the position to say that, so what, right? But how many of us will be able to all cross those levels and say that we'll make it happen no matter what? And be at it, knowing very well that the world will create labels for you and you will not be given. So these are amazing awards, but you will not get the other awards, right? Because there's an amazing homemaker also, and an amazing mother also, and partner also. And you have to acknowledge that those things will be, it's not as if you're saying that I don't want it, but you're saying that those are not the only things that I'm going to actually live my life for. There's so much more to be done in this world. If both sides happen, great. If they don't happen, then also great. But I want to be part of the change. And in order to be that, I need to step out. I need to get my hands dirty. And that's the only way it will happen.
Thank you. That was fantastic, Pallavi. And I'm so glad you sort of peeled the different layers. And I'm also very glad that you raised this point of that ceaseless labor of women, you know, from morning to night. And this decision, it's not just about being part of policy making and politics, but for any kind of engagement outside home, it's not like your work at home is ending. Nobody is doing that work for you. There's no sharing of household work. So it's double, triple, quadruple labor over and over and again. And for people of across classes and across regions. And I think that's also a very, and the other, I think, very important point that you raised is about agency. And when we are talking about decision making within policy spaces, being able to contest elections, being part of the committee which decides who will contest, or being actually sitting in that committee and framing a policy, when you don't have decision making ability inside the house, or you don't think I am capable of taking decisions for myself, how do you reach there? So there's such a long and arduous journey that many of us have actually had to take and will have to take. So over to you, Aprajita, from your space of experience and work, what do you think are some of these key challenges to accessing these spaces and making yourself heard within these spaces?
I think is this working? Okay, perfect. I think this is fine. Okay. I think I just want to start with a very funny story. Ma'am, don't mind, but when I was selected as a LAM Fellow in 2010, I was in the first batch of LAM Fellow. And, you know, politics as a space is not open to middle class unless you've had any exposure to the government. So I come from a very normal middle class family. My parents did work in the government, but like my mother is a teacher and my father was in one of the insurance companies, not in the civil services or anything. So I live in Delhi. In Delhi, you breathe politics. You like basically think about government all the time, even if you don't want to. But when I said that I want to work with a politician, you know, my parents were very happy about it because they recognize that government has an important role to play in all of our lives. But the kind of questions that I got asked, because this was 2010, this was the first time I think MP offices had opened for young people. So many people asked me this question: will you be safe there? Are you sure you'll be safe? So that was the perception that if you are going into politics, you'll get killed, you'll get raped, you'll basically not come out alive from an MP's office. And I was just shocked. I was in a corporate job, and when I went to resign, this is what my HR basically asked me in the exit interview. So I think generally politics is a mystical sort of process that people see from afar, and while they understand and everybody goes to vote, we don't understand how it works, and what we don't understand scares, I think, people. So I will come to the gender aspect of it, but I generally think also that it also has to do with, and middle class in India has very well cushioned themselves. They're like, we will not interact with the state unless we really need to, right? We'll go to a private school, we'll go to a private hospital. I mean, people in rural areas, they understand very well this scheme is something that is there. They need to get this from the government. But look at our cities, look at our urban population. We don't want to think about government as much as possible. And therefore, this politics is a very mystical process. Plus, public life in general is hard. Yesterday, I think I was discussing with some students that many women leaders are not married, for example, who are chief ministers, right? Well, many prime ministers in India who are men also never got married. If you compare it to the number of people who are generally unmarried, right? And I think this is a less spoken about aspect. And I have a huge respect for people who are in public life, having seen MPs work day in and day out, even though our dinner table conversations in middle class homes are like, oh, what does government do? What do MPs do? They keep sitting. What do bureaucrats do? But that's not the case. I understand it really well that, you know, they put in a lot of work, and it requires a lot of personal sacrifice to be in public life for the first of all. And I think this process, by very nature, the kind of sacrifice and the kind of determination it requires makes it difficult for everyone. And then, of course, because women, you know, we have a patriarchal society, etc., it becomes a lot more difficult for women to surmount that challenge. And that's not just politics, entrepreneurship, anything that basically requires them to take away that time from home, take care of others, is something that becomes really, really difficult, right? And I think unless we change politics itself, what are the entry routes into politics? What do we expect people who are in public life? For example, in India, why is it frowned upon if, you know, MPs go on leave? And, you know, if the prime minister, we'll never hear, this is our news, that prime minister has not taken even one day off. Why? He's a human being. Let him take one day off, unless the, you know, something is falling apart. So I also think that this whole narrative around public life and politics in general makes it even more harder for women to penetrate and then, you know, become elected representatives, because we just have we don't expect our basically political leaders to be human beings, right? And I think one thing that we really like to do in VILAC is invite MPs and get people to interact with them, to understand, you know, they are people like us, like, you know, they have normal aspirations, and, you know, they smile. So, and they have a good sense of humor. But I think that is one thing that I feel generally needs to be fixed in politics, that would make it easier for women, but also generally for people who don't come from political backgrounds. Also, I think, Pallavi, what you did mention about internalized patriarchy is something that I think, so for example, if I look at the side of policy making that I am situated at right now, I don't think women are really underrepresented in that. Unpopular opinion. Look at your class. I think women far exceed men. Look at civil society in general. You'll see a lot of civil society leaders. In fact, men are sometimes the minority. We, in fact, have to really make an effort to hire men in our team sometimes because a lot more resumes come from women. I want to say this is a good thing, but except it's not, because it's also coming from an internalized patriarchy perspective. Women sometimes feel they can work in the social sector more because we don't see ourselves as primary bread earners. And we all know that policy space does not pay as much, and civil society does not pay as much as some other corporate jobs do. So some of my friends in college, I used to do a lot of street theater. That's what really tickled my mind, and I kind of got into this whole policy space. Some of my male friends who wanted to get into social sector could not. And while all the women in our team got into the social sector, because on the male friends, there was so much pressure that they have to go and do an MBA, they have to make sure they have a good corporate job when they are 20. So I think that when we talk about patriarchy, we also have to release men from this, responsibility of just taking care of, all of this, I guess, economic well-being of the family. Because until we free them, they will not be able to free us of, the whole housework sort of situation, care, this thing. So I think that is also really important. And internalized patriarchy actually sometimes comes in the way of doing this, because we have been conditioned sometimes as women that men need to take care of us. And no matter how evolved we are and how educated we are, I think we all sometimes keep falling into this trap that we need to be taken care of for some reason. And I think that leads a lot of women not to accept leadership roles when they are available to them. And because there is this sense of, do I really need to do that? And we can talk about women's labor force participation, etc., etc. In India, actually, the more educated women are, the less likely they are to be in the workforce. And if you belong to a wealthier family, you are likely to drop out of the workforce because there is no expectation. So we also need to change expectations from women, and women need to change expectations from men as well. And I think this is a dialogue that has started. It's percolated some parts of society. India is a very diverse society. It'll take a lot of time to actually, for people to talk about that. And the third thing that I want to talk about is, I think women as economic actors, right? And I think this feeds into what I was just talking about. There is, okay, great. We are now educating women. We have right to education. I think we have 100% before pandemic. We had 100% enrollment in primary education, etc., etc. However, I don't think that we still think of women as economic actors. That education is happening now, but to what end is not very, very clear. And that's where the missing link is, which is why the more educated women are, the more likely they are to drop from the workforce. And because we don't do that, it works in really funny ways. I'll give you an example. I earn a good amount of money now. And I wanted to, so my parents want to buy a house, and I wanted to apply for a joint loan with the bank, to a bank with my parents. My parents have retired now. So the bank, this is not an RBI guideline, by the way, but because the way, families work in India, and you think that once a woman is married, she does not belong to her natal family, the bank is like, oh, we don't give loan in such cases. It's only the son who can take with the parents, not the married daughter. This is 2022. I am a person of extreme privilege, given my education background, my finance or whatever, I have a good credit score. And yet I face this question today. They're like, so after a lot of heckling, they're like, get an NOC from your brother that he doesn't have a problem with this. But that is, so I think to our credit and to the credit of our constitution makers and lawmakers until now, I think our law has raised ahead of the patriarchal norms that we have in Indian society. If you look at Indian laws, they are in many cases very progressive, much more progressive than Western countries as well. But I don't think, but there's a principal agent problem there. It's not transmitting to the institutions that are supposed to implement that policy in the first place. So even though the law does not say anything that I can't get a loan, the bank for some reason has decided, depending on their experience of how, you know, these family disputes happen, that they will not give me a loan. So I think when we talk about representation in policy, I completely agree. Political representation is very, very important. But I hope and in bureaucracy, very important. I think I have done many studies where bureaucrats have, implemented great programs in their districts because they were women and they realized that, women constituents needed those kind of interventions. But I also think that we cannot wait for this representation to become better. It will take many years to do that unless we are obviously pass that 33% law in the parliament, which I don't think will happen, given that it's been pending since, I guess, 1990s now in some form or the other. But I think what we also need to think about is that what is the end goal of that representation? And can we work towards that end goal even though as we work towards representation? And I think that end goal is gender responsive policy making, keeping in mind also that the whole notion of gender in itself is under question mark these days, and people are talking about multiple gender identities and all of that. So how does that interact? So I do think that while there's a great need to talk about the representation of women in policy making, there's also a need to institutionalize this gender responsive policy making, which happens irrespective of who is the policy maker, whether a man or a woman or a transgender man or a transgender woman or whoever. So that's my only humble submission. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Aparajita. And I'm just going to quickly pick up that point of economic actors. And I'm saying, so as you rightly said, that it's women from privileged backgrounds. I would say also because earning is not so much a compulsion for the family as a whole. So they quickly get into that space of women caregiver, man breadwinner role, and they can operate like that. Which brings me to the question of, we do have a lot of women working on the ground, especially women from working class backgrounds, from marginalized communities. They have to work because otherwise the families don't run. But even there, their earning is sort of recognized as a coping mechanism, as a supplementary income, which ties to the question of, women not being seen as independent economic actors. At the same time, just flipping the, extending the same argument, when we talk about women in policy making, in bureaucracy, in politics, these are positions of visibility, of leadership in many ways. And that is why it is very difficult for, communities, families, women themselves to actually imagine women in these positions. And equally difficult for women when they are in these spaces to be able to assert their positions because they face so many hurdles on the way. So I'd like to hear from you, Dr. Gopalan, and welcome. I'm sorry I couldn't welcome you in the beginning, but we are so honored to have you here. If you can just reflect, ma'am, from your experience of, what are some of these challenges that women face in accessing these spaces of leadership, let's say in the bureaucracy. And once they are in the space, what is that journey that they have to take to really rise to, positions of prominence?
Since this works, I'll just borrow them.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, and sorry for being late. Actually, we had to walk the long way from the gate. So though I reached in time, that took a little bit of time. So sorry for that. And I think we've heard from the three panelists about the challenges which we face. And so I'm going to restrict my opening remarks to just one point. And I think this, in common with many of our issues in public discourse today, the issue of underrepresentation of women in policy making, we all know the problems and we all know the solutions, but somehow we are not able to make that journey from the problem to the solution. So I'm just going to keep my points to a conceptual level as to how do we traverse this particular path from problem to solution, and then we can have the specifics in the general discussion. The first thing is that I think the first answer to this underrepresentation is normalization. It should become normal for us to accept or to get used to women being in the public space. And somehow our discussion has been largely about public policy, maybe because it's a public policy school, I suppose. But it's not just public policy, whether it's industry policy or whether it's corporate policy or any kind of leadership position, it should become normal. And once we get used to it, the more people are there, more people will get used to it, and more we also get used to it. And that consciousness of being a woman, but I speak from a vantage point of having 35 years behind me. So probably I've worked a little bit more years, so everybody will come there. Most days I finish tying my sari, put the bindi. The nails are not so good anyway. But and then I forget that I'm a woman. And my very good days have been when, my officers, my subordinates who work with me forget that I'm a woman. And my bestest days have been when they even forget that I'm their boss. Because all of us are so involved in the task. And let us not, we are looking at the underrepresentation at the women issue, but let us look at policy, how decision making is done. And decision making is done in consultation, in negotiation, in discussion, in lots of small fights. So, and all of us get so involved in the task that we forget each other's gender. And I have this anecdote which I'm very fond of repeating, that now everybody's familiar with MSP, minimum support price, after the farm laws issues. But this was way back in 2015 when nobody knew what was MSP. And we were working on the MSP policy for the state. And the MSP policy is a temporary policy. It's a yearly, annual policy. And one government is badly under-resourced. So we have one computer and 20 of us crowding around that computer and all of us discussing the issue. And that day I had missed my breakfast. And so while, we are talking about food and grains and how to purchase rice and how much to pay for wheat, I'm, suffering the pangs of hunger and lunchtime coming close. And I kept saying that let's stop and let's continue after lunch. And I repeated this once too often because I was really hungry. And my officers who were with me, and I still tease the one person who said this, his name is Narendra, he's still in service now. And they got more and more impatient as I went on repeating. So finally he tells me that, Madam, I'll tell you in Kannada and then I'll translate. Madam, nimage hasividre ನೀವು ಹೋಗಿ ಊಟ ಮಾಡಿ ನಾವು ಮಾಡಿಬಿಡ್ತೀವಿ. So if you're hungry, you please go and have lunch, we'll finish the job. Because and he said this in a far more abrupt way than I'm saying it to you now, because he forgot that I'm their boss. He was concentrated on that task, and I still tease him about it, that this is what you did to me. So there's a spectrum of experiences, that's what I'm trying to say, and it can be as normal as your subordinate yelling at you for wanting to leave your desk and go and have your lunch when this thing is more important. And that's where I would like all of us to reach. The second thing is to traverse that difficult path from problem to solution is convenience. And convenience doesn't apply only to women. It applies to everyone. If we make streets safer or simply the pedestrian path easier to walk on, creatures available near or in the offices, it helps everybody. So it should be easy and natural for me to be able to call upon resources elsewhere so that I am able to do my job better, and both men and women will benefit by it. And by and large, even as you were speaking, I was thinking that these issues which we face now and which we are speaking, true as they are not true only for women. So many of these are true for agency. Men don't have them either. You pointed out how they have that whole responsibility of, looking after a family. At a very young age, they have to start thinking about how to take care of my wife. One of my colleagues, he decided not to go for an assignment overseas, a very prized assignment overseas, because his wife basically was not comfortable moving, especially at the time of COVID. So there are so many, it's not something, all of us, we all have their struggles and men have their struggles too, and we'll realize it as time goes on. And we shouldn't be so short-sighted or so blinkered as to think that only women have the problems. All of us do. So convenience, I think, and ease in being able to work, whether within the home or outside the home, whether in the public space or in a non-profit space or in private corporate spaces, should become easier. The third is sisterhood, which I always think is, a very good handle which women can use, and women can do a lot to help other women. Mentoring, one of you spoke of, just a little push at the right time. But I don't know how far it happens, how much it happens. I have not experienced in my own career any kind of mentoring, whether from men or from women. And I would like, if I may take that liberty, that a friend of mine penned this little few lines, like a poem, not exactly one, something like blank verse. And I would just like to recite, and the poem is called Sisterhood. And this is what she says, that she was a woman like me who, enraged by my presence, nothing more, spread slander, worked so hard to ruin reputation and career mine. A woman like me she was. And she too, who tried to talk me into refusing opportunities, then went on to pay professionals to harass and malign and drive me out. She too was a woman like me. Very politically incorrect in this forum, I'm sure. A woman like me, fearing retribution from my very existence, hired killers, creatures of the dark. To what end? To kill or maim or merely intimidate? It puzzles me still. But certain it is, she was a woman like me. All women like me. And here I stand, taller than a tree, freer than the wind, my work and home and life intact, a legacy so full and so fulfilling. And I thank and pray that I should never be or become a woman like them who are just or could have been a woman like me. The poem is called Sisterhood. I thought I would just present it. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you so much. This is such a, I don't know what to say, what adjective to use. It is such a powerful poem, and I'm reminded actually of Maya Angelou, and still I rise in many ways. No, I know, of course.
It's one of those invisible penners.
Yeah. Right. So we will move into the second round of questions. And I think some really great insights have come in terms of what challenges are there in accessing and making oneself visible in this space, and also in what are some of the ways in which we can overcome some of these challenges. But I think another very important question is to sort of look at, to understand that what is the contribution that women can bring once, if they are part of these policy spaces, what value add in that sense do women bring? Now, of course, one can say that it's not a question of whether women do value add. If women are 50% of the population, we should anyhow have 50% women in whatever space we are talking of. But I think this question also comes from that point that we discussed about policy sometimes being very gender blind, and policy being framed in a way which actually does not address some of the very important concerns of large sections of population. And it's not just about women. It could be people from backward communities. It could be people of certain genders and castes, etc. So it's very important. So representation there becomes very important. But what is also very important is how do we build a gender lens into policy so that policy is able to be much more inclusive, not only in its planning and design, but in its implementation and in all the associated frameworks of, say, monitoring, of budgeting, and all of that. So my question would be that how do we, can you perhaps reflect from your experience how women in positions of leadership have really made a difference in the kind of policy space that you're inhabiting? So once again, maybe I'll start with Jyotimani ji.
I start from what ma'am said. If she's a woman, she's a good boss. I doubt. So I doubt if boss is a man, a woman colleague would have said that the response would be different. So woman can, what I'm trying to say, woman can bring a friendship and compassion into the work more than a man. Hope the men here agree with me. The second thing, we are talking about inclusion. Whenever the policies are made, whenever the discussion happen, we keep saying that it's very important to involve men in the process, involve men in the, whatever the gender discussion we have, whatever the violence against women we are talking about, it's very important to bring men inside the forum, inside the discussion. Because there are 2-3 issues. Actually, Pallavi spoke about how women are victims of age-old thought process. It might be in our DNA. The same might be in men DNA. How women are trained to see such particular things in a particular way. The men are also trained to see particular things in a particular way. In a way, women victim in a different way, men also victim in a different way. So unless until we don't unlearn things, help each other to unlearn things, it's very difficult to resolve the issues which is existing in the patriarchal society. Patriarchy is basically, we see the history of human race. It started as a matriarchal society headed by a woman. So then it slowly turned into patriarchal society, in its male dominance. Finally, we reach a place where actually women is completely sidelined, discriminated. So this is what things evolved over years. When really want to see a real change, we have to work together. So that's what actually my thinking is. Whenever women get into places of policy making, I'm sure actually women are trying to include men. We believe in inclusiveness. So that's what I think it's very, very important to be in a place of policy making. Second thing is we understand, because of our experiences, the pains, the discrimination we go through, we have become more sensitive to issues out of compulsion, out of understanding. So that second thing, actually our skin also become thick over a time. So it's a kind of, we run into at the same time we are running into 2 parallel tracks, which is really impossible. That's what actually in my view woman goes through. One side we have to be compassionate, one side you have to be thick skinned. So we kind of are trying to bring a balance. Yesterday before I coming here, I jumped into the police barricade because police tried to stop me from going someplace. So then many people ask me that actually you're so nice how you jump to the barricade. I said it's I don't see it's a two different thing. Then somebody asked actually you had a flower yesterday. Somebody gave me, I put it. That's it. I liked it, so I put it. So that many people said it doesn't go along with when the completely there is a in the picture completely khaki uniforms. Then there is a barricade, you jump with the sari and the flower. I said that's what I precisely represent, maybe I said some of my friends. Sorry. So this is what actually women can bring. There are a lot of studies, this is too loud, I think. Maybe we have to be here loudly. Yeah, okay. So we have a lot of studies about how women in Panchayat Raj had made a difference. When compared to women and men, how they work, because we don't have much study on assemblies and parliament, that area of operation is completely different in terms of gender, in terms of financial independence, in terms of access to institutions. Then Panchayat level, men generally work for infrastructures like roads, buildings, where you can put their name. Women work for basic things, education, sanitation, water issues, something like that, health. And also the women more aggressive than women are actually, there are men sometimes get it, not, I'm not saying all the men, I'm just making a simple comparison. Men get into sometimes sand mining, so those kind, encroaching the lands, those kind of things. Women put their life at risk. Women Panchayat elected representative, they actually protect the lands, protect the natural resources. It may be other way around in some cases. We cannot say 100% women are correct, 100% men are wrong. But I'm just drawing the attention of the comparatively the percentage. So that's where actually women make lot of difference when they comes to policies. I'm sure actually, ma'am, I don't know, I just see her for first time. I have many colleagues in my state whom I work with. Men bureaucrats, men bureaucrats are actually very good. I'm not saying they are not, they are bringing lot of policy. I have happened to work with mostly men bureaucrats. They are really great to work with. But I personally feel women actually in some point, there is maybe 1% different, 2% difference. They approach towards issues completely different. To make them understand the particular issues is easy. So that way, actually, that compassion, that experience of going through a difficult phase, and we know actually things cannot happen like this, because we've been trained to like this. So, but over years, people like me feel we cannot be as patient as that doesn't work. In my political experience, we are really, we should be kind, we should be compassionate, we should listen to people, because as ma'am rightly said, policies can only be made when we start hearing the people, especially hearing the opposite views, and internalize those views and respect them for what the views they express, because it might be different from other than what we believe. So that's how policy can be made. Policy is giving up something, taking out something. Sometimes you're giving up more, taking out little. But still that little is making a lot of difference. Doesn't matter you give up more. It might be your ego, it might be your work, it might be your time. But as long as it don't compromise the basic integrity and the values which you believe in, it's fine. So that way women are, I think, more better in making policies. Second thing, I feel over a time, that expectation is like stereotype. Like she said, how politicians are expected to be stereotype. So I am the most victim in my state, maybe probably. See, I don't believe in a particular dress structure. We have a kind of dress code when we go to parliaments, when we come to some other functions, but rest I feel it's that my mood of the day that decide my dress code, not my work of the day. So many times I feel my opponents generally use my dress code to attack me. How can actually you're an MP, you wear jeans? That I used to say that is not your problem, because my mother, because for a long time I was living in my mother's support, because we talk about financial independence of women. Till I become an MP, my mother was supported me financially. So either it's my mother buys this cloth, what is your problem? Then what I counter to that, actually I go and put a tight jeans and a very short shirt and we'll put it in a social media. So this is how I counter them. When off late they stopped talking about my dress codes. 'Cause I used to say, you don't criticize, you criticize me on what I do, where I lack. So don't criticize me on how I sit. Then there are guy actually who's a colleague of mine. One day told his friend that actually is also currently in the government. He said actually she sat actually cross-legged in her with me in the dais. I said, of course it's my leg. I am not putting my leg on his leg. What is his problem? So these are all issues actually we have to speak out, because sometimes we cannot be compassionate, kind and all. So when there are times we have to express ourselves very strongly. It's not offense to someone, but how we have to protect it's not right. It's a dignity, it's self-respect. I cannot see someone actually hurt my self-respect based on my dress, my dignity. If I give, as a woman, if I give my self-respect and give my dignity, we cannot achieve anything. So having our self-respect, our dignity, our rights intact, we should negotiate with what actually we work for. That's how the policy making place is getting much better, because we are here already. With all struggle, we reach some place of policy making. Now, what we should keep in mind is that we are not making policy for ourselves, because we already reached there. We are making policy for someone else, some community who really desperate to reach here. So that's where actually that leadership and the role of gender is playing a very critical role, because we clearly know from there to reach here how much difficulty we have. So generally I approach how I have a young youth congress and NSY colleagues who works with me. I generally feel my job, my duty is to help them out as much as possible. I don't want to, for me to become an MP, it took 25 years. I don't want my youth congress colleagues or NSY colleagues waited for 25 years, become 40s and become an MP or MLA. I just want to, they are very young, they are fresh, they come up with new ideas, because I have a generation gap with them. Sometimes I feel they might useful to my party and the society more than me. So our, ma'am read a poem on sisterhood. So that sisterhood is something actually which we can give into each other. It's a kind of hand-holding, kind of supporting each other, giving the space to them. We cannot sit and occupy the space forever. Some of the guys actually sitting as I truly trust much better than me, much more committed than me. So that's where actually we have to bring generations in. So this is a kind of relay race. Somebody before us, you quote Michelangelo, somebody before us actually gave that mandate to us. It's like centuries we have been running this race like this. Somehow this race has to be stopped. Somehow we have to walk. Somehow we have to sit and relax. So when we want to do this, we have to walk together. That's the basic, I think, one line we all, whether it's a man or woman, we make the men understand this is what we go through. I personally believe what my student days, what my friends as a men, how they are. But I have seen generational changes now. I carefully go through the Nirbhaya movement. I was Delhi that time. So I have seen equal number of young boys actually who came in the street, who fight for Nirbhaya cause. They don't think actually these days actually it's violence against a woman or discrimination against a woman is no longer a woman responsibility. I think many of the young guys who have that understanding. So that's why actually society is slowly changing. It's also, we are also put some effort to just engage them and keep them along with us in the tough journey. The journey still, I feel, despite we have changed a lot, despite there is a lot of space, despite a lot of achievements made by women, despite very few feel left, but still we need to explain to each other, need to share each other, need to talk to each other, and we have to walk along. That's what I personally feel. That's the one thing which can make really a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Pallavi.
So, four women here, and all four of us have all four of us also have these tidbits of different experience, views, perspective, be it for age, for the time that each one of us have spent. Ma'am, I completely agree with you. 35 years is such a long time. The entire journey is so different. And visibly, all four of us are women for you. And you didn't share. You did not share your experience, right? You're only asking questions. But if ma'am were to share also, ma'am will have her own. There's no way she's going to say that I completely agree with Pallavi and ma'am also and her also and of course ma'am again. That no, she's also ma'am. The point here is that when we look at the physical structure and we look at somebody just from the gender lens and we say that here's a woman and they will have similar experiences, it goes so much deeper. And then we looked at the intersectionality of just being a woman also, both physically, biologically, and then add to it race, caste, social sector, the kind of upbringing, the journey, the cities that we have lived in, the countries that we have lived in, the places that we have traveled to, so much of it. Parking this point aside, now let's come back to policy making, decision making, whatever it is, whichever rooms these are, right? And you can name 50 rooms and you can say here decisions are being made on, let's say, environment. Here's a room, here decisions are being made on mobility and infrastructure. Here's a room where there's an issue of safety, economy, and so on and so forth. Who are these decisions for? Until and unless we're planning to have multiple worlds or countries for different categories and segments of intersectionality of diversity that exist in this world, until and unless that makes sense. But then also you put 5 men together in a room, I can guarantee not all 5 of them have the same experience. They are also thinking differently. They are also thinking about the problem lens that they have is depending on the kind of life that they have lived. So there's a diversity there also. Now let's combine these 2 points. The world that we are living in, and let me just put like nation into perspective here, India. All these developmental decisions which are being made for, it's for this one country. And this is where all of us are residing. If there is one place for all of us to live, and all of us have to find it conducive, shouldn't all of us, with all our specific, nuanced, diverse perspective, lived and witnessed experiences, be involved in the decision making? Because the minute we are outside it, we are missing out on very key perspectives. We did this small activity actually. There was a program that we were running with about 40 volunteers, and they were supposed to go and do survey on ground and ask families certain questions about substance abuse and other habits and procuring or availability and all those things. Categorically, I initially asked them to choose their own members. And obviously, human tendencies, I will ask somebody or I will pick somebody who looks like me, who has the same kind of thought process like me, because yes, there are exceptions and there are amazing leaders who will surround themselves with people who will disagree with them. So I'm not discarding those leadership, but generally, traditionally, humans want to work with people that they will easily get along with and will not have difficult conversations with. Difficult conversations is where ma'am says something, I may not completely agree with it, and if I say it, ma'am is still okay with it. That it's interesting that Pallavi didn't agree with what I said. Pallavi, tell me more. What is happening in your mind? Where is this perspective coming from? And that's what we call the art of having difficult conversations where people are not agreeing with everything. In these rooms, the one policy making rooms that we are talking about, those are the difficult conversations that are happening day in and day out. So coming back to this exercise, when I asked people, these students, to select their fellow team members, they all ended up selecting their friends. Same jokes, same conversations. They lived in the same areas, dress in a certain way, talk in a certain way. Um, Surprisingly, the same social segment also. The kind of places that they go to, the dressing sense and everything. Convenient, comfortable. When I sent them out on the field, the problems that more diverse group was able to identify and the problem that this similar looking thought process, both visually looking and I'm sure intellectually also it was same because I asked them to mind map that entire structure. It was so poles apart because different people, when they picked up people who are not like them, strategically they identify those individuals that this person will have a different view, this person will have a different view. This is a strategic view in which that team was chosen. They performed better. And I'm not even bringing the gender lens here. I'm just telling you in this forum, while we are talking about women, and this is one thing that I really love about whenever women talk about inclusion, we always want to talk about let's include everybody because we don't have the matlab, sorry for Hindi. It's been going on for such a long time that if we are fixing the problem, might as well fix it at the root, at the funda level, at the fundamental level, at the fundamental level. And this is the fundamental problem here that as long as we will only be surrounded with people with same experiences, lived or witnessed, same thought process, what we are missing out is the perspective, needs, problems, issues, inputs, solutions, um, everything of the 99 other individual segments of diversity who are also going to use the same space. And while we may not be able to relate, or it may so happen that every time we start talking about women, it sometimes feel like that every time we are talking about, oh, women don't have this, women don't have that. That's okay. Change the lens. Think about people with disability. Okay? If because when we start talking about including, we don't want to wait for another panel to happen. Right? So just if it's about why we need more women, that's because we're missing out on a very, in this Pictionary thing, that one image is missing. The minute you say that, okay, without this one image, or this block, this entire image is incomplete, I'm telling you there are 90 more blocks which are missing right now. Maybe there are 4 or 5 only which we are looking at and we are saying, yes, this is perfect. It is not perfect because the minute you invite these diversities of thought process and experiences which were not involved at the time of decision making, this space is useless for them. They will not be able to enter also. They will not be able to thrive here. Yes, you may force them in those spaces, but they'll drop out. So that's my simple answer. I don't want to take more than, I don't even think ma'am is looking at the time, but it's okay. I'm done.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think every point that all of you are making is so fascinating. I am definitely not being able to follow the watch. But yes, we are running out of time. So after this round of questions, we'll also like to have some audience interaction because that's, I think, one of the crucial parts of any panel discussion. So yes, without wasting any more time, Aparajita, your reflections.
I think I'll just keep my remarks to 2 points that I have experienced in, representing to government and to members of parliament and to elected representatives. I spoke about women as economic actors, but then we also need to think about women as political actors. And by women as political actors, I don't mean women in politics, but women as voters. I think so. We were doing this very interesting study for Lancet Commission, and we'd consulted ma'am for that, where we were looking as how does health figure as a priority in political priorities of a state? How does that come about? How do different actors, influence how much mind space does a government or a state government give to health? When we were doing this, we saw state after state, wherever health has come into picture, there has been a change in the voting pattern. And, women have started either voting more in numbers, and or their literacy level. For example, Tamil Nadu is a great example, because since 60s, mid 60s, I think women have almost constituted half of the voter segment. And of course, the literacy rates are really, really high. So I think one of the things is that for gender responsive policy, if that is our end goal, then representation even as voters is really important, not just at the level of decision making, so that policy making becomes gender responsive. That's one. The second is, when we talk about gender responsive decision making, sorry, as in representation in decision making, I also want to recount another funny story. So I used to work for actually it's not my story, it's one of my friend's story. She works with a big tech company, right? And when we deal with civil servants, like people like ma'am, they are very sophisticated, you know, they have a lot of exposure. So they will obviously treat you as equals. They will not, you know, think about your gender as much. But when we deal with lower bureaucracy and when we are representing companies, it's a different ball game altogether. For example, you know, this friend of mine was told that हमें पता है, sorry, don't mind the Hindi, I'll also turn English, but it's more fun in Hindi to listen to this. हमें पता है आपको क्यों भेजा है आपकी कंपनी ने, you know. So they are saying, basically insinuating that the company is trying to honey trap this man, right? आपके जैसी सुंदर लड़की को क्यों भेजा है? That kind of conversation will happen. When I was used to work in Snapdeal, when I used to go and meet government officials, and these are people who are, you know, deputy directors in ministries, and basically people who have not come through the IES, but different kind of backgrounds, or even people who are just, you know, sort of moving the files in the ministry, etc. You know, people would ask questions like, so आपके पापा क्या करते हैं? I have gone to represent some company on some business, and they would not mostly ask a man, you know, all these questions, but they just want to place me somewhere in the social hierarchy by asking me what my father does for a living.
और थोड़ा सा और उम्र ज्यादा हो तो पूछते हैं आपके कितने बच्चे हैं.
Exactly.
Not even whether you are married. So I get this a lot. How many children do you have?
Exactly. So they will always try to assess your standing in the society by some of these markers. So I think, and I think governments realize that. So a lot of state governments, for example, have now put 33% reservation in government jobs, right? And this is not civil service. This is essentially state government's jobs. And I think it's so needed that within every stage of decision making, because I think sometimes when we think about policy making, we only think that only bureaucrats and only members of parliament and only executive is doing that. But in my experience, while policy is made at those levels, the policy transmission happens through these people, right, who are doing more public facing role, etc. And if you don't have enough women represented there, it's very hard for women to access those spaces. And generally, as I think Pallavi was saying and ma'am was saying, if there are too many in a space, you know, if you're the minority, forget if you're a woman or a man, if you're, for example, in a if you're a short person in a room of tall people, you would feel out of place, right? It's not about you're special, right? And you don't want that kind of limelight. So it's very important that when we talk about women in policy making, we talk about every level of government, and not just people in the parliament, but also like in ministries, in police station, in policing, for example. There's this huge conversation that there should be a women's desk. Why did that come about? Because everybody felt, it happened to me once. I think funny things happened to me. Once I had parked my car in Pandara Road in front of a very senior bureaucrat's office for some reason, and went to Pandara Road to eat at Gulati's. If any of you are from Delhi, you'd recognize. When I came back, my car had been broken into. So we called the police. So police, the person who were patrolling, they came, and this very, I think, senior, as in age, police man who came, he asked me, "Madam, बाहर खाने आए थे आज, घर पे नहीं बना खाना?" I'm like, that's not your business. I came, like, आप कालका जी से आ गए, बहुत दूर आ गए रोटी खाने के लिए. these are the kind of questions that, you know, he was asking me. I was like, just do your damn job and, you know, like, let me, anyways, like, you know, something has been stolen from my car, instead of asking, doing that. Because basically, I mean, there are lots of layers to this problem. People don't want to do FIRs, etc., etc. But just this approach, right? So I think when we talk about the state's interaction with citizens, there is definitely a gender dimension to it. Sometimes it's very visible, sometimes it's not. And therefore, at every level of state, and wherever we are interacting, there has to be equal representation, because so that we don't enter into these kind of funny things. And though I do want to say, because of internalized patriarchy, don't expect women also to not come up with these kind of questions. That I think is a bigger social chain that needs to happen, but it will, you know, create some change to that extent.
Thanks so much. So, ma'am, over to you.
Find all the things which I did not say and then say that. The first, just address that compassion thing first, because I don't think I feel compassion is at the forefront of my mind when I am policy making or program implementing. It is pragmatism, right? Almost all of the time. I'm not saying I'm totally devoid or bereft of compassion. I do occasionally feel, especially for myself, but but by and large, it is pragmatism that rules. Just as they were speaking, I was remembering an incident which happened very, very long ago, 1989, if I recall. My first posting as Assistant Commissioner, Savanur Subdivision. And it was I think, the first month of my joining there, and also the first month of my marriage. So we were together as a couple there. And around midnight, there was a knock on the doors, like very loud knocks, banging on our door. And the home also, the quarters of the Assistant Commissioner, was what at that time was considered outside the town. Savanur is a very, very small town in the north of Karnataka, in what used to be the Akhanda Dharwar district, very large district. And in that, Savanur is a very small town, and our little quarters was almost outside the town. And in the middle of the night, there's this banging on the door. And then we went to open it, and there were these 10 or 12 boys standing outside. And then they, you know, they were a little hesitant to speak to me, but then my husband was with me. So, you know, approachability and all that, they were easier to speaking to my husband. And they said that they are from the social welfare hostel. The social welfare department runs a number of hostels, you would be familiar, for underprivileged children of both genders. And they said, we have not been fed. We missed our meal because the principal of that hostel is not taking care of us properly. He did not give us our evening meal, and we are hungry. And they've come to the Assistant Commissioner. This was not my department. It was not in the strictly under the jurisdiction. But then an IAS officer in a remote place ends up doing everything. So what do I do? Compassion was not the first thing which, you know, it's why I picked up this particular example is it's something which will evoke compassion, isn't it? I mean, children going hungry, 10 to 16 years or so age group, or even younger perhaps. And but for me, that I'm faced with a situation, and that situation has to be managed, and managed correctly. And so what I did was that I, you know, quickly called, you know, whoever was available, my officers, and we asked the nearby, there were these chota hotels. Savanur is such a small place, doesn't have a regular restaurant, so dur ki baat hai, but, you know, even a very small hotel is not there. But these were these small shops where, you know, some people will have some idlis or stuff like that, or jowar roti more commonly. And we asked them to quickly fix a meal, and we, you know, we kind of fed those kids over there. So what was it for me? Compassion was not ruling in my mind. I was faced with such a situation. Of course, the other things came later, action against that particular person, all that came when they broke. But the immediate issue was feeding the child. So most of the time, compassion is not where I come from, or I have reached by now. It is pragmatism. That said, I agree on the other thing where you You use the word inclusion. I would rather use the word consultation. My method of working, it's not actually the content which you bring, because I am pretty sure any other officer in my position faced with children who are hungry would have immediately rushed to feed them, regardless of whether he was a man or a woman. But the way I work generally is more consultative. My general observation is that my male colleagues are a little more distant from their officers. Maybe they have to keep that distance because gender keeps them closer. Maybe I have to bring more consultation because my gender automatically puts a distance between me and them. So I have found generally that I am more consultative. So there is my chamber is like this, that there will be always 10 to 15 people in my chamber. And we'll be always discussing this issue, done everything openly and transparently. I also find that it has that added side benefit that the more transparent you are in your working, the less corruption you give room for. Because everybody knows what is the decision and how the decision is arrived at, and therefore, nobody can, try to benefit from that decision. So that is one thing. One more contribution in terms of policy, whatever the policy, for me it has always been that toilets everywhere. I think if I can boast of one single contribution to policy making, that whether it is schools or whether it is, MSP centers where you buy, the government buys grains and wheat and rice from farmers, everywhere I have put that insertion that let there be toilets. Many of them are not well maintained. Many places we may not have water, but at least there is something. I mean, that you come to that, when you are under-resourced, you say that at least let us have something, or let us make a beginning somewhere. So these are trivial things, really, but I think they make a huge difference. That, I cut my finger. So toilets do make a huge difference to people's comfort, particularly women's comfort, particularly rural women when they are traveling from long distances. So these are small ways. And I thought that, I was, I don't say proud, but I would always think that this is something which is peculiarly women's problem, and I have addressed it. Till I wrote an essay when I was doing my PhD in IIM, and my professor wrote on the margin that we also face this problem. So that kind of cut me down to size.
No, I think these are actually huge contributions, and talking about women going out to work in whatever space, I think transport, and you talked about that point, convenience. You need transport, you need toilets, you need drinking water. And so I think these are so critical for women and people from different spaces to actually come out and do good work and important work. So thank you very much. I think this has been a fantastic set of conversations, discussions. We have more to go. We don't have a lot of time, but we really want you to have an interaction with the audience, and I'm sure there are many questions. Can I ask one of you to sort of circulate the mic? Yeah, you have. So we'll take maybe about 4 questions. Keep your questions brief, and then we'll ask our panelists to respond.
Hello. Hello. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for your views. I have a simple, I want to understand about the policy implementation through a small case study, especially with some misogynist problems like marital rape in our Indian democracy, where every role where policy makers have given set of recommendations to solve this problem or raise it down. On the other hand, politicians don't want to talk about it. No political party has a stand on it confirmed. And bureaucracy, unfortunately, is controlled by the politicians. So how could these issues could be solved through policy making, where you have those PDFs, large PDFs, where there are solutions, but at ground level, you have nothing.
Yeah, this is more of a like a thought. it's open to all the panelists. So we talk about policies do really make a change, but there are certain policies that sometimes deter. For example, there's maternity benefit leave. So if we talk about formal sector, when if for example there are men and women of same skill capacity, but if there's a newly married woman in her reproductive age, it deters. I mean, there are certain menstrual leave, for example. There are certain policies that deter women in access the opportunity. So I mean, for a time I feel that I become hopeless because the issue is not about the policies, the issue is about the deep embedded mind and biased minds of the people. So my just a simple question is, like, I am hopeless. I think it will take years and years, I don't know how many years. Do you think the same, or can it be changed, or can it not be, and how? Thanks.
Hi, can I? First of all, thank you so much for this session. I think this is very much needed. Where are the women in underrepresentation? And I have one reflection and two questions, so I'll try to keep it very short. My reflection is, it was funny how all the panelists had to first safely say, oh, we don't mean any harm to men. We're not trying to say that men are bad, but we're also trying to fight for our rights. I find that also very thought-provoking, because why are we justifying it that way, even when we're fighting for our rights and the historical of patriarchy? And I personally believe that yes, all men benefit from patriarchy. So that was the reflection, and how everyone started with, oh no, we're not saying that men are bad, but you get my point, what I'm trying to say. And I'm just processing of what happened in the session. You gave one example of how many women are there in our class. So it's largely women and less male, as the sex ratio is. And then we also said that the social sector and CSOs are less paid. You don't make much money. So if I'm assuming that social sector is women dominated, from the example, I'm not making a stereotype here, but if it was the other way around, if it was men dominated, then would that be the case, that it's less paid? Or that's my first question. And second is where ma'am, Ms. Jyotimani pointed out that how there's a stereotype for her role, or what kind of work she can do in women and child development only, or etc. The kind of roles. I'm not trying to justify the stereotype here, but when we talk about women and child development, isn't it important to have women representation there? Because if again men or the other gender is making policies for women, wouldn't that not be again useful? So I feel that is also important. I'm not saying the stereotype is important, but women representation to make decisions or policies for women is also that's my view, but I would like you to highlight some points if I've missed out or something.
I have a question. Ms. Jyotimani, so she rightly pointed out that in all levels of political parties, there has to be women representation for women leaders to emerge in parties. But my basic question is, in terms of even membership, I don't think many political parties have a lot of women members, for that matter. And women who are working on the ground, once they are promoted to certain level, I don't think they are reaching the levels of getting a ticket in a party, both in the state level and the MP elections. So what is the gap there? Why is it not happening?
Two
Yeah.
more, ma'am, please.
Yeah, so I'm from Maharashtra, and the current political scenario and debating is happening mainly on the comment by Chandrakant Patil on Supriya Sule, like women need to go home and don't participate in decision making, and especially in terms of OBC reservation. And I saw your tweet today also in support of Supriya Sule. So I need more. What do you like? How you elaborate this kind of tendencies in politics? And it's an excellent example of patriarchy and what also male politicians are expecting from women's. And yeah.
Last question, please.
Hello to all, and thank you so much for sharing your viewpoint. It was deeply informative. My question is to Jyoti Mani ma'am. So I heard one interview of Miss Mawa Moitra, who is a MP from West Bengal, and she acknowledged the fact that it is not easy for women, not easy for middle class people or people who have no political connections in general, especially for women, to get into politics if they do not already have a political background. And she said that she just happened to be at the right place at the right time. So I want to know from you that what is that right place to be in, and yeah, and because just like it came to my mind that if I want to become an IAS officer, I have steps to follow. Academics, I have steps to follow. But for example, if I want to become the PM of this country, I have no steps to follow. So just wanted to know from you if there are any right places to be in.
Okay, thank you so much. So maybe we'll start from Jyoti Mani and we'll move to Pallavi, to then Aparajita, and to then Dr. Gopalan. And you can pick up any of the questions or all of the questions and respond, but please do respond in 5 minutes maximum. Yeah, that's also a lot, but whatever, like 3 to 5 minutes.
See, I just would like to go there, that woman and child development thing. See, I agree with you that actually women, especially when we are looking for drastic changes, policy, woman-friendly policies, equal policies, it's very important to women be there. What I essentially mean to say, see, there is a there when whether it is a state assemblies or a parliament or this all the portfolio stereotype for women. So there will be women. Not necessarily all women has to go there. Some men also has to go there. I see Periyar I mentioned. See, Periyar is a man. He was the first feminist in the world. It's not that actually men will not have anything. Even the ideas which even now we are still hesitant to accept or articulate many of the ideas he proposed. But he proposed that centuries ago. But it's very important. I personally feel very important for men also to be in that committee. A woman also has to get given the space to science, technology, home, finance, something like generally women are not considered to be fit for. So that's what I feel. Any committee can be both. But maybe women and children committee maybe have more women representation, not necessarily 100% women representation. In the consultative committee which I'm into, I think I'd say all are women. I don't think any single men is there. Or even they are not coming for the meeting. Second thing, actually, she put me in a very tight spot. That like that place. Place, I think essentially my friend Mehua mentioned that actually she changed over the parties. Uh, so that timing of the idea of actually I feel TMC is looking for some good face, very articulate, who can really tough, challenging. Actually, Mehua fit that bill, I feel. Also, the time, actually, lot of political parties actually now try to prepare, not all the women, at least they try to give space to their firebrands. So that era has slowly coming in. So that's why that the space and time is very important. Also that society also, I said earlier, slowly changing. They would like to, they would like to see what women MPs are speaking, how they conduct themselves, women MLAs are doing. A third part which Mr. Patel comment, actually that is a classic example of how the patriarchy works. Supriya's been on MP for I think 3 term now. She is known for her debates, values, vision, and she is a kind of woman which the people like me who do not have any political background, first time MP. Actually, Supriya is the one point contact to all the people, irrespective of parties, to solve all the problems. So any problem, you have to find out where is Supriya, then you have to tell her, it will be resolved. So that kind of person she is. Despite being Supriya playing such a great role, Mr. Chandrakant Patil can see Supriya to go back and cook. That is why I said, why don't you go and cook? It's not necessarily a woman's job. So this is what we are precisely fighting. I would like to say that the ideology which Chandrakant Patil represent essentially believe that woman is meant to cook and produce children. that basically the problem lies there. I'm not saying all, even men from other parties have the patriarchal view. This particular man actually essentially driven by the ideology. That is why we are very, very careful in choosing ideology. We have to tell the political parties accountable. That's what I'm saying. Accountable in terms of ideology, accountable in terms of their activity, accountable in terms of transparency. Unless until the changes happen in the political parties, it's very difficult to change the society. I agree that the political parties by and large represented by the values within the society, the people within the society. But the same thing what she asked also coming from the political party framework only. Unless until political parties are not reforming themselves, political parties are not more inclusive, accommodative. Political parties are same. He also asked about marital rape. I'm ashamed to say that actually no political parties, including mine, do not have any clear view on that marital rape issue. But DM, it's not party's view. It's we also, many of us within the Congress party, actually many of us have very strong view, but not as we are not having a party's view on that. And second thing, recent shock to us, a judiciary divide on this. A judge can say that marital rape is okay, another judge says actually marital rape is not okay. That's a shock. Any problem with political executives, actually it's supposed to be fixed in the society. So it's all kind of coming together as a one word, that it's a patriarchy. It's like she said, actually patriarchy helps men. Of course, that's precisely because it helps men. It has some kind of advantages to them. Precisely because of that, we have to tell them that it's wrong to have that advantage. That is why many of us feel it's very important to including them, having a conversation with them, taking them along on our fight. Because, for example, men in the violence against women, especially rape, we see actually, we always see victim as a, we actually put lot of pressure on victim than the perpetrator, than the culprit. So unless, then we conduct class for women actually on gender sensitization, how to face gender violence, how to face discrimination. This is not actually done by a woman to woman, done by a boys, men, generation of men. Go and tell them that this is wrong. Women are equal, women are not a body, women are not a sexual object. Women are actually have a brain, emotions. There's no point to talking in between ourselves. We have to talk people whom we perceived we have a problem with. So that precisely because of that, we want to find a solution to them. We cannot keep blaming them for what they are doing, because we are in the receiving end. As much as possible, we have to resolve this issue. Maybe it will take 1 decade, 2 decade, 3 decade, I don't know, maybe century. But we have to put it in the fast track to keep. But you convince one guy, I think 2, 3 girls are safe. That's what actually it's like mechanically I'm saying. Also, I think feel men also changing. I have seen in many of my colleagues actually slowly changing. Earlier, when I'm just quickly finish. Earlier, when we go for youth congress work, we have to. I have in charge of many states. We have to travel. Place like Assam, we have to travel. So I found many of my colleagues actually ask me, "Ma'am, we need to stop because we are going far away. There won't be any hotel or motel or petrol pump. You want to use washrooms, or actually, ma'am, we were traveling an area, we might not have proper medical shops. If you want to have sanitary napkin, we need to buy it from here." So those are all the things slowly changing. Men also thinking about what kind of physical inconvenience woman goes through. Still, they are not very clear on what kind of mental inconvenience we can go through. I precisely put in one point. I feel who's the best men in boys or men, when I'm sitting in front of a man or talking to a man, I personally feel I should not feel he's a man. So we have to create that kind of comfort zone with men. That's the point I think we are all trying to address. Thank you.
Okay, I actually took notes because some pointers were you did. So the things got missed out, I'll take care. And then other two maps will take care. Okay, I'll not speak on the subject of marital rape. I think that's been spoken. I just hope if it's live, there's trigger warning. If it's going on YouTube later, please give trigger warning. for the maternity benefit and the policies which are being made and introduced, and how sometimes, yes, they do backfire in practice. Employers, companies, which earlier used to think whether to hire women, not to hire, now are looking more closely at their age and at what stage of ovulation or life cycle that they are at, and trying to make as close assumptions as possible whether we should be hiring them or not hiring them. I work with these companies closely, so I can tell you that this is happening. But what it has also opened up to, and which is the case for a lot of policies, right? When they get introduced for one gender, funnily, the discussion opens and other genders also start participating in it. You know, if we did not have maternity benefit, we would have never been talking about paternity benefit also, or now parental leaves. So that's evolving. Being part of this policy world, I'll never say that once a policy is made, it's the end of it. I always look at any policy being made as the beginning of it. Let period leave also come, just saying, okay? Okay, they're talking about one day, let it start. They're only talking about women. I think the world is still, our society is still trying to understand what do we mean when we say woman, physically, biologically, emotionally, and so many things. This is the beginning. So yes, in the short term, a lot of mind shifting and behavioral shift is going to be required. But it's good that we have something to work with instead of just having nothing to start this conversation with. The reason why we apologize to men, I think you asked, right, is because of the kind of question that men like him end up asking, right? It's very important to acknowledge, very, very, very important to acknowledge, like ma'am also said, that the minute we take this stand and we say that women are the only ones who are thinking about women, I think we are creating or contributing to a force or support group which is also benefiting from this equal and equitable world that we are working towards. We are pushing them away unknowingly, which is not at all required. See, it's not a war, but we have to know whose mindset actually requires changing and whose mindset is already changed. Like, you have to recognize who is already standing here. If they're already standing here, I have to acknowledge that there are 5 people who are standing here already. So I have to say that yes, there are some men, when we speak about patriarchy, when we speak about feminism, when we speak about gender issues, the same way in the beginning that we had to acknowledge the intersectionality of gender and sex and sexuality, the same way that we have to give these explanations when we start talking about this topic, the same way we also have to say that yes, when we talk about patriarchy, we are not saying all the men are after cis women, trans women, what? So you have to give these explanations, right? These specificities are so crucial for the larger work that we are at right now. And why do you want to feel alone? I don't want to. I don't think anyone here wants to feel alone, that when we are looking at building a more inclusive world for the future, we are the only ones doing the work. So that's the second reason. It's not just politeness, it's just stating the fact and the truth as it is. I think all of us, because we have experienced all kinds. We have experienced women who are against women. We have experienced having men in our lives or across the table who are very much aligned with the thought process. And that's why we just state it as a matter of fact. I have 3 more minutes, or maybe 2 more minutes. I'll just take that. Thank you. Women and Child Department, I just have one line. It's one thing to have a say on certain topics because you have lived those experiences and you have witnessed those experiences. But I think the only thing in ma'am's story that I saw missing was consent. Like, if only this would have been consulted, I think this would have been okay. And because this role division of care work, pink collar jobs, pink collar roles, this has to stop, because when you walk into corporates, when you walk into so many spaces, that's why the world is so divided. Till 5 o'clock, I will see a woman taking care of a shop. Right after 5 o'clock, because it's getting dark already, she's asked to go home because somebody needs to cook, somebody needs to get the vegetables, somebody needs to do this, somebody needs to do that. So until 5 o'clock, it was all okay. She was the shop owner. After 5 o'clock, she is no longer the shop owner. Who is asking her? Right, so it's the matter of consultative approach, which ma'am was talking about. Consult. As long as something is done in consultation, for all I know, a woman does want to stay at home after 5 o'clock. And that is okay. But consult. Okay, what is left? Pay scale, very important. I know you would want to, ma'am, you would want to address that, but I'll quickly say I acknowledge your point. This is something which you actually start thinking in a deeper way. Going back to how women are not really conditioned and thought to be the primary breadwinner, bread earner, the ones who are going to create wealth. So far, women have only been conditioned one, either make pocket money, do hobby work, max to max have a job. The minute she starts talking about career, that is also okay. But are you the one going to create wealth for this family? That conversation is yet to happen. And because we have not really been told to have those kind of conversations, investments, wealth is a different thing than just bringing home salary and climbing up that corporate ladder. Because those conversations have not happened, a lot of learning curve is still remaining. And yes, for all we know, maybe if men were leading the social sector, yeah, the salary structure would have been different. Might be. And I am done.
Great. This has actually become like a coffee with Karan rapid fire account. I don't know if this was the intent, but that makes it more fun. Okay, on marital rape, just my few thoughts. I think sometimes we are a representative democracy. Sometimes law has to move ahead of what the current social norms are, and law sometimes does that, which is why we have courts. So don't lose heart. High Court has given this judgment. My hope is that when it goes to Supreme Court, and that is why we have Constitution as the guiding light, right? And not just what people think at a given point of time in the country. So therefore laws do evolve. So even though right now, even if some political, I mean, look at Article 377, the government did not pass the law in because they probably thought that passing that law in the parliament would open a Pandora's box and it would probably just get stuck forever then. So they just did not contest it in the Supreme Court. And we have the guiding light of the Constitution to guide us towards justice. So I think don't lose heart. You know, I think Indian law still is quite ahead of social norms. And while there are some things that need to be fixed, on an overall perspective, I think we do have the institutions that will fix them. I'm an optimist. I already said in the morning. Okay, so that's one. Second, I am glad that somebody brought this maternity benefit leave. I love this topic.
I put up a private member bill on this.
Okay.
On paternity leave also.
On paternity leave. Yeah, right. So I think there is a dichotomy in gender responsive policy, which I always struggle is. So what does gender responsive policy say? It says that acknowledge that different genders have different constraints. Men and women have different constraints. So kindly make policy in a way that mimics society. Now, sometimes when you're trying to be too gender responsive, you're actually legitimizing the current society more, which is what maternity leave did, the 6 months, 3 to 6 months. It has now, by law, has kind of told you indirectly that it is the woman's job to take care of the baby. You know, it is her primary job. This was a great, I guess, opportunity to give an equal paternity leave so that, you know, both parents could share this responsibility. That did not happen. And therefore, we have to be a little bit careful when we talk about gender responsive policy. It should not mimic current society so much. That's a dichotomy. That if you become too gender responsive, are you just legitimizing the difference that exists between men and women and actually making it more permanent and not solving for it? So that's something for you guys to think about as you take part in policy debates. And there is a way that you can solve for this. Collect gender disaggregated data and generally do some regulatory impact analysis that India does not do a great job of. We make a policy. There is no ex post analysis usually. There are MIS systems for NREGA and all the programs that are implemented, the schemes, but not so much for the policy. Where is the data to say that you know, yes, less women are getting jobs. I mean, there is that data, but it's not very conclusive, and it's not being collected by the government itself. So whoever collected, Team Lease has come out with a report. Government will question that report tomorrow, saying that who is Team Lease to give me this data? You know, it has to be my data. So please collect it. I mean, make a law which says that you have to have a post, and this is not just for gender, for everything, a post facto evaluation of what are we doing, and then amend it accordingly. So that's something to think about. Social sector salaries, I didn't want to tell you guys that, oh, social sector doesn't earn money. That was not the intent. So don't go back disheartened. It's a, I think, a great joy to be engaged with, you know, everything that is happening around us. Every day when I go to sleep, I go with a very happy, you know, thing in my mind that I've done something which is very meaningful. Um, I think social sector, although you're right, Pallavi, every occupation that is women dominated, there is a dip in salaries. We've seen that in teaching, we've seen that in nursing, because women are, in fact, I moved from one place to another in Delhi. When I had a woman cook, she charged me less. And because there was a male cook for the same occupation, I was expected to pay more, right? So yes, there is that intersection of women being a dominant, but I don't think social sector is just because of that. It's more to do with the fact that, you know, it's a not for profit sector, and the idea is not to create wealth for yourself. And I'm not saying that people don't, people do that. It depends on what path you follow, and it's fine. The idea is to create impact. Just one last thing I want to say. I don't have any, I think political ma'am has already covered, and she's the best place to talk about this. Just one last thing. Ministry of Women and Child. Have you ever thought, why is it Ministry of Women and Child in the first place? Why is there one ministry looking at both women and children? Why? That also is a question. I mean, and look at the budget of women and child development. Most of it is going towards children from that budget as well. So again, you are actually saying that it's women's responsibility. Children are women's responsibility. So that conception of the ministry is problematic. Forget who's on the committee, you know, to talk about that. So that's also something to think about. I think just last thing, I think the point that you made about patriarchy benefits men, but patriarchy also sometimes benefits women, and many women don't challenge that. And that is why it's so important to acknowledge the fact that men are also sometimes prisoners of patriarchy, and they are also not able to break free of some of the responsibilities that I spoke about. And therefore, it's the whole idea of dismantling patriarchy is to free everyone of the shackles of patriarchy and not just women. And I think that is a very important narrative. And I'm actually very sad that the word feminism has kind of confused this narrative as well.
Okay, over to you, Dr. Gopalan.
I don't think anything is left, so I'll try very hard. Uh, issue of marital rape or any other social issue. There are times when law is ahead of society, and there are other times where society is ahead of the law. That is where the role of advocacy comes in. And if you feel that, you know, there ought to be a change in policy, or there ought to be a change of judicial intent or judicial perspective, that's where advocacy comes in, where you can play a role. And that also comes to you who spoke of hopelessness, which I don't even understand why. Because if you see something wrong, should it fill you with the urge to right it, or should it fill you with a sense of hopelessness that it cannot be righted at all? So one way to look at it, and see, I besides all this, I'm a mother, and as a mother, I have a critical perspective, or I do take the liberty of critiquing my children who are of roughly your age. And I find that this generation is very, very sensitive to macro issues, and not so sensitive to the immediate indignity or the immediate injustice going on right around them. And that is why I always try to emphasize the role of personal social responsibility. Everybody speaks of CSR and non-profit sector, social sector, working for larger causes. Just look around you. Look at the person whom you feel needs help, and whether that person wants that your help, and then go ahead and do it. And that will hopefully get rid of that sense of hopelessness you feel, and you'll be making a real difference in a, not in a macro way, but in thousands and thousands of micro ways, which makes a huge deal of difference. I did not apologize for men. So I want to make, I in fact said the converse, that women can be bad as well. That was the whole point of that poem. So it works both ways. So that is anything else which any of you have left out? Which one thing, when to enter politics, I am hardly the person, but you were right when you said that in education or employment there is a structured entry. In a chaotic world like politics, there is no such structure, especially if you don't have a political background. So the time is now, and then you keep persisting until the opportunity opens. Just start. Whenever you feel ready, if you feel that it's right for you, just begin and start persisting. You'll have to persist, whether you are in bureaucracy or whether you are in politics or the non-profit sector. So begin right now and keep on persisting till the opportunities open, and they will. It may not be necessarily defense committee or finance committee. It may be women and child committee, but still that is a great opportunity, and you can go ahead. And to correct that perspective that non-profit, she unintendedly made, let me assure all of you that public service does not pay. Government service does not pay.
I think this whole
pay well enough. Yeah, pay well enough. So, but there are a lot of men in it. So, it's not that men enter the paying sectors and women enter the not so paying sectors. Not true at all. I think now
the structure way I forgot to answer.
Yeah.
Actually, in all political parties, I think there is some, it's not like a very proper structure, there is a structure way. In my view, all political parties have a student bodies, then youth wings, women wings. There is a structure in the political parties. It's not that there is no structure. So that's how actually people go. But the issue is actually you have the battle lines are not very clearly drawn. See, if you write a civil service exam, within 2-3 years you will come to a decision that either you pass it or you will think actually it's very difficult for me, or my mind is changed, you can move on. Politics is, it's floating. It's very difficult to, it's always has an undercurrent. It's always, why we see its complex is, you have to fight within yourself, within your political party, and with your opponent, if you have an alliance, that as well. So it's like, it's a very, very, we are dealing too many things at the same time. That makes things complicated. But there is a structure. It's not that there is a structure. It depends on our personal ideology and value system. We can choose our parties, which respective, among the all political parties, definitely they have structure.
He needs to become prime minister.
It doesn't matter. You join any other party, then you have to join a national party. But things have changed a lot. You cannot say there are regional parties also. There, Devagowda ji was there, Gujarat ji was there. There are many people were there. Yeah, opportunities everywhere. You want to become a PM, actually there is a possibility. I don't think, as ma'am said, actually people like us have to be optimistic. There is a chance for become a PM.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly add one thing about that question on patriarchy. And I just wanted to say that, it's about a system of oppression, and sometimes mostly men, but also many women, because of internalized patriarchy, they can perpetuate that system. So I think fight is against a system. And also patriarchy does create gender roles, which I think can be very restrictive. So if there is a boy who loves to dress up, who loves to sew, who loves to cook, that boy will be facing a lot of taunts from childhood onwards. And because of that provider caregiver role, there is a pressure, just like there is constraint for the woman to be able to dream of something else and do something else. Similarly, there is a pressure on a man who perhaps is very difficult for a man to say, I want to be a house husband and I don't want to go out to work. So there are these pressures. So we are not, so of course patriarchy privileges men, but there are certain gender roles which are created, which also can be very restrictive. And for gender responsive policy, I just want to say that I think gender responsive policy needs to acknowledge the difference, but should not perpetuate discrimination. So there is a difference in that, acknowledging difference and perpetuating discrimination. So on that note, I think we are very much late. Yeah.
So adding her point, she has, like many other people, have this issue, how to get into a political party. I actually went to US in 2006. I found a lot of congressmen and senators who have interns with them. Eventually, these are all the interns become politicians in UK. So in India, there is no such structures. LAMP has a fellowship, but LAMP don't come to field or politics. To fulfill that, actually, I recently launched a fellowship and internship exclusively for politics and differently for policy and field work. There are many MPs, MLAs these days actually getting into this kind of internship more. Only thing you have to search a bit. Thank you.
Pallavi, 1 minute only. 30 seconds.
I have a very nice connecting point to this. So firstly, yes, couple of years ago when we started Netri, this is precisely the question that we wanted to answer. That when we look at politics, policy making as an industry and not something which is just there in the movies, how do we actually bring a consolidated knowledge and intelligence? And that's why Netri was formed. So we're answering those questions there. We're bringing fellowships like what ma'am just shared, because you can't find them. And individuals like what you have access, forget me, other individuals that you have access to, it's not possible to have access to members like all of them present here. So finding the volunteer opportunities, internships, questions answered. See, the system is changing. Just keep asking the questions because somebody will create a solution for that. So thank you for asking that.
Thank you for being such a fantastic panel. We learned so much. And thank you for being a fantastic audience. So we'll be closing. Do you want any closing remarks?
I'm sure we are going back home with so many questions with us today. And let's take the night to think over them. And we would love to have you back tomorrow. We have 3 very important panels starting at 9 with the climate policy making, basically. Then we have a panel discussion on criminal justice system of India. And the last panel on elections and manifestos. And I think every policy aspect that we have discussed today combines and, concludes with the last panel. So we would love to have you tomorrow. Thank you for being there today. Thank you so much.